ultimately, there is only one thing that really heals us, and that is love. A little time each day to commit ourselves to our creativity and especially focus on the things that we most love to do and make the biggest contribution to the world around us.
I was like, I can't even access my true creativity until I kind of sort some of these things out with these upper limits.
That's discipline. It's just showing up every day as being committed to your creativity, committed to your genius. I was just reflecting back when you mentioned Oprah because I can remember the thing that happened just before she called. Happiness is not a faucet you turn on. True happiness comes from fully feeling everything that you feel. Being more creative in the true sense is letting go of what's in the way of your creativity in ourselves. We are the universe. Everything that this universe is, we have embodied in ourselves. Ordinary creativity doesn't last. It's not sustainable. When you're out of sorts with your creativity, you're out of sorts with life itself. That's a great question. I don't think anybody's asked me that.
Wow.
Yeah, wow.
What does it mean for us to shift from ordinary creativity into that true creativity that you talk about in the genius zone?
That's a good starting point. To me, if you can understand and allow creativity to work in your life, it takes care of so many of the other little problems that people tend to have. Because, for example, as you probably know, Katie and I write relationship books like Conscious Loving and things like that we've been on Oprah with. And those are not, people don't obviously see the relationship between creativity and their relationships, but it's absolutely essential because if you are not open to your own creative fulfillment inside yourself, you'll take it out on the relationship in some way by expressing dissatisfaction or expressing criticism, or just when you're out of sorts with your creativity, you're out of sorts with life itself, because true creativity has to do with owning and opening up an organic part of yourself that's been there all the time. Whereas ordinary creativity always requires some input from outside. You know, like, I mean, and that's not a bad thing. If you pick up a pencil and draw with it, that's using something from outside. But are you drawing from something that comes from your core? Or are you just trying to copy what somebody else has done? So creativity is a life force, and human beings organize ourselves around life forces, like our sexuality and like our emotions and our desires. And creativity is another one of those extremely important sources in ourselves that if you really can open yourself to it, it takes care of a lot of other life problems.
I love that. I think that, like, for myself, coming upon your books in the last couple months, I feel like it's been such a big shift for me to first identify my upper limit and what that's all about, and how that was just so severely blocking my true creativity. I often say, like, we do everything, I think, from either love or fear. But I actually think that creativity is one of the very few things that could actually be down the middle. It could either come from love or fear. And I think, like, coming from our ego or coming from our true self. And that's been a big discovery for me reading your book, The Big Leap.
Yes. I know a fellow that used his creativity before he got hold of me. He used his creativity to create a lot of material things.
Right.
But he had this one experience. he had a poster on his wall of this particular red Ferrari that he wanted. And when he got to a certain place in his real estate career, he wanted to buy this Ferrari. And I think it was like maybe $300,000 or $400,000. Anyway, to make a long story short, he finally got his Ferrari. But then he said the first weekend he took it out to this famous spa. And then when he got into it to go back home, it wouldn't start.
Oh no. The
So
universe playing a little trick.
it sounds like the universe was having a little joke on him. But I can imagine, if you've put your creativity and a couple $100,000 into buying a particular material object that you think is going to make you happy, and then all it takes is one click of the key to make you unhappy with the same, $300,000 car. And so that's the problem with ordinary creativity, is that it almost arrives with a sell-by date stamped on it, because ordinary creativity doesn't last. It's not sustainable. You can't keep firing it off over and over again. You eventually have to, if you're going to sustain it, open up the channel to your true creativity, the stuff that comes directly from the universe itself. You see, because we're in an interesting position as human beings. We are both created and we are creators at the same time. And so we are created in the sense that we are made from the same stuff as everything else in the universe. But we also have the power now, we've gotten creative enough to even get in there and alter our genetics so that you can invent yourself anew in a way, in spite of what's been happening over the past couple 100 million years in your particular genetics. And that's very exciting, because there are people that, for example, suffer from cancers that go back generations and generations in their lineage. And now they've found a way to turn that gene off with the new therapies. And that's a pretty amazing thing to do. But here's the important thing. I was reading once in an astronomy journal about a place that they've discovered out in the universe that I love to talk about. It's a place that is a hot spot, and it's giving birth to 32 new suns, S-U-N-S, per second.
Wow.
32 suns, like our sun up there. It's cranking out 32 of those a second.
Oh my gosh. Talk about creative, right?
That is the creative thing right there, where it's turning nothing into something right there 32 times a second. Well, guess what? We have that in ourselves. We are the universe. Everything that this universe is, we have embodied in ourselves. And so it may feel a little different. We may not have that much heat, but what we can do is open up and turn on our connection to the universe itself and its direct communication to us. And once you do that, it takes a lot of the pressure off of everything else in life, because if you're in touch with that, how are you going to be unhappy anymore? Because if you just open up to where happiness comes from, there it is. And so once I discovered that, I haven't been able to make myself feel unhappy anymore. And even as hard as I try, sometimes I can't do it, because now I'm in touch with that creative, ongoing, choiceless connection with the universe. And it's not easy. I can't say it's not easy, because it's not hard work, but it requires diligence and attention, fond attention, easygoing attention. You can't work at being more creative. Being more creative in the true sense is letting go of what's in the way of your creativity And the moment you do that, you have more access to what you had already. You just didn't know you had it.
Right. Right. Oh, I love that so much. And that's kind of just like one of the things I really wanted to touch on for myself. I've realized it's like that unbecoming, right? It's a lot that you talk about. I think after reading your book, I hadn't even realized how much I was self-sabotaging and not realizing it. And those tendencies, I was like, I can't even access my true creativity until I kind of sort some of these things out with these upper limits.
Well, you're going about it the right way because confronting your upper limits is a key pivotal part of opening up your creativity. Because if you can, like in the Big Leap, I talk about a couple of the limiting beliefs, like the big one, the belief that I'm fundamentally flawed in some way, therefore I can't have the good things of life. That's one of the biggest beliefs that people carry around because of things that happened in their childhood. They think, I'm not smart enough, I'm not pretty enough, I'm not whatever enough, I don't have enough charisma to do what I want to do in life. But that's just a limiting belief. The first time I remember Oprah, before she was even Oprah, when she
Mhm.
worked at a little station in Baltimore, like
Mhm.
a public television station. And, then to see her, what she created
Yeah.
for herself and kept creating. And one of the ways she did that was she kept inviting people on her show who are really good at manifestation. And every time one of us would come on and give her a new technique, swoom, she would use it because
Yeah.
she's really a down-to-earth, practical practitioner of these kind of things that we're talking about. And I love her dearly. I wouldn't be here without her, at least not in this particular
Right.
formation, because up until we were on her show for the first time 30 years ago, we
Mhm.
were both university professors, and Katie had a private practice and I had a private practice. And, we wrote books and things like that. But there's a big difference between, suddenly having 10 million people
Mhm.
looking at your stuff rather than 10 pairs of graduate students. So,
Mm.
but I think all of it comes from how we feel about ourselves at the fundamental core of ourselves. Do I feel like I am a part of the universe? Do I feel like I am the universe? Which you are. But
Mhm.
a lot of people think I'm different. I'm a special case. I'm not
Mm.
smart enough. Whatever they think their special case is. But to me, we're all made of the same universal elements. Were just configured a little bit differently.
Right. Mhm.
You know, if you look at the evolution of the human brain, the actual hardware, the stuff in here, the wetware, hasn't changed hardly any in the past 40 or 50,000 years. What's changed in the past 40 or 50,000 years is how we use it, the
Mm.
software we're putting in there.
Right. Right.
And so there have been such big shifts over the past 40 or 50,000 years, just over the past few hundred years.
Mhm.
500 years ago, people didn't realize that we were in this particular planetary relationship with the sun and how
Mhm.
that worked. And, they thought back then that the earth was the center of the
Right.
universe and everything revolved around that. And they would try to make up these theories to make it work, but it never did work.
Mhm.
And so it's a good indication too of how people get so set in their minds, because remember what happened to some of those early people, like um, I forget the guy's name now, not Confucius, but the guy that discovered the Copernicus. That's right. Uh, those people like Copernicus, who got massively dumped on, or some case like Galileo, were burnt at the stake for suggesting that the Earth wasn't the center of the universe.
Right. Right.
And now we all understand that. But the same thing happens with the human mind in a way, because a lot of people going around thinking that the solution to their problem is out there somewhere,
Mhm.
or that their problem was caused by something out there. And a lot of times there are out there incidents that happen, like I was just talking to you before we got on the air, that I had knee surgery 3 weeks ago that I'm recovering from. And so that was a thing. It was a thing that came from the outside that I'm now dealing with and coming out from under. But if you go back before that, who was it that decided to have that knee surgery? That was me. And if we take responsibility for the good things and the troublesome things that we create in our lives, we get to a place where you're in harmony with the universe. You're not pretending to be some separate case. And a lot of times people get so caught up in also thinking of themselves as victims that they don't come out from under that and choose to take full responsibility for how they're going to create their lives. And I can say definitively about that because 40, 50 years ago, I was one of those people, that I never even considered of manifesting my own life. And then fortunately, I had a bunch of incidents happen, and here we are 50 years later with a completely different body, a completely different life.
Wow. It's so interesting how like this part of us that is so creative, like you say, like there's kind of this very, very long generational trauma of this innate feeling of unworthiness. Or for me, like a big one was the outshining somebody else, and it was like I was
Yes.
so creative, I just expressed myself as a child. But other people see that as, oh, you're bragging, or oh, you're this, and you just dim it a little, a little, a little. And until I read your book, it was like not even a concept that we've been dimming this light that is within us.
Oh, I'm so glad you're emphasizing that because, yes, one of those big limiting beliefs is that fear of outshining, the belief that you have to keep your light hidden. And here's something also, just an amazing fact. My wife is a movement therapist, and so she uses a lot of movement in her work. Children, before they go into the school system, have been measured to have about 3,000 different movements that they can do with their body. When they measure them again after they graduate from high school, they are down to 300 movements they can do with their body. In other
Wow.
words, 90% of our kinesthetic potential gets gradually stuffed into 300 movements by
Oh
the
my
time we get out of
God.
high school. Isn't that amazing? It's like that.
Amazing.
Yeah. I read a study once where they took preschool children that were in like a kindergarten class, and they hung little voice activated mics around their necks so that it recorded everything that was said to them during the course of a week.
Yeah.
And so, and this was at school and at home.
Mm-hmm.
And when the scientists analyzed all of the things that had been said to the kids, it turned out that about 85% of the things that were said were of a negative nature, like stop that, don't do that. If you do that again, I'm gonna. So
Wow.
only 15% of the stuff was something positive, hey,
Wow.
good job on that, or hey, come help dad with this, or, things that were designed to be positive kind of comments.
Mm.
To me, that's stunning. That's like that
Huge.
3,000 movements being boiled down to
Yeah.
300 in 12 years. So let's just assume that we all got our lights turned down a little bit in the growing up process.
Mm.
And that's just going to happen. But now it's our genuine opportunity in adult life is to turn that stuff back on. And it doesn't take as much time as you would think. Like you said, from reading the book and everything, just look what happened to your consciousness as a
Mm.
result of seeing yourself in a new way. So it took me 30 or 40 years to figure it all out, but I put it in a book now. You can figure it out in 2 hours.
Yeah, right. And that's amazing. And I think like that's why I'm like, oh my God, everybody needs this book. It's just it's so inspiring to feel like, yes, that's within us. And I think you say this probably somewhere in one of the books, the awareness that we shine on those things is kind of like the monster in the closet that's like, nope, see, it's not in there. And you're like, oh.
Yeah, that was my mom's thing when I was a little boy. I thought there was a monster in the drapes that because they were kind of blowing at night. And so I don't think I was in school yet, but yeah, I wasn't in the first grade yet, but I called my mother and she brought a little flashlight in, and that was her solution. She just gave me the little flashlight and said, if it happens again, shine the light on it and see if it's an actual monster or not, or if it's just the drapes, So she was
What a
very
perfect
practical.
analogy. Like what a perfect analogy for how we
She was
can.
quite the psychologist. But sure enough, I had my little light, and if I woke up and the curtains were blowing, bing, okay, I could see that it wasn't a monster.
Right.
And yeah.
So perfect for like what in our own context, right? Is like shining a light on those things where even, for myself, after reading the book, somebody had said something to me like, "Oh, you're so special," because I had gotten an opportunity for something, but it had a hint of sarcasm. And it was the first time I ever noticed that actively happening, which I think is something you talk about being a superpower, is noticing in the moment. You're like, "Oh, normally I would just unconsciously dim my light because of a comment like that." And it was a shift for me.
Well, I'm so happy to know that you and other folks like yourself are catching on to this, because there's an old saying that I got in one of the apocryphal books of the Bible. Apocryphal was, there were a bunch of books of the Bible that they had a big conference somewhere in the first few hundred years, and they decided which were going to be the official books in the Bible and which were not. And one of the ones that were kind of pushed out was one called the Gospel of Thomas.
Mm-hmm.
And it has some amazing stuff in it, but it says, if you bring forth what is within you, what is within you will save you.
Mm-hmm.
If you do not bring forth what is within you, what is within you will destroy you. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, 2,000 years ago, that was on people's minds, at least on Jesus's and Thomas's minds. And so I mean, that's one of the most powerful
Best.
truths as a psychologist I could ever hear, because I work with people all the time that are in the process of bringing big things out of themselves, that um, people that have done big things but want to go all the way and make something happen in the world that's truly has lasting value to it. And so to do that, we kind of have to benignly turn ourselves inside out and confront our limiting beliefs, and then get in the process of making choices that favor our creativity. Like the first choice we get people to make when they come here and is we ask them to go in a room by themselves for 10 minutes and only think about one question. And then we ask them to phrase the question and then take 3 easy breaths. And then phrase the question again, either think it in their minds or say it out loud, and then take 3 easy breaths. And here's the question: what do I most love to do? What do I most love to do? And then we ask them just to go take 3 breaths to kind of give the question a chance to settle into their deeper being, rather than just repeating it over and over again in your mind. So I urge everyone to do this. Make a choice to do this for a few minutes, and it'll change your life, because we have people that come out of that little room and said, I got it. I realize that I've been doing something I don't love to do, and I realize how I could begin doing more of what I do love to do. To me, I love those conversations because I know that person is going to be better functioning in the world, but also happier. Happiness is not a faucet you turn on by giving yourself something or eating an ice cream cone. That's an artificial form of happiness. But true happiness comes from fully feeling everything that you feel. If you feel sad, let yourself feel it. If you feel angry, just feel it. Let yourself be with it for a moment instead of changing the subject. Or fear. Let yourself just take a big breath and feeling it, because happiness is a feeling that comes about as a result of your feeling your other feelings.
Mm.
It's kind of like the
Wow.
froth on the top of a cappuccino.
Wow, that's such a beautiful concept. Like that happiness comes from feeling everything. Happiness is
Yes,
not like the only thing. It's like, wow, from feeling it's like this release almost. And that's
yes.
our happiness and creativity is kind of right there once we release anything else.
It's right there. And
Wow.
it's so empowering to know that. That's why I want everybody to begin to experiment with these ideas so they can really feel themselves connected to the universe and a part of the universe's creative flow.
Yeah. How do we so this is something you talk about in the genius zone, and I think it's so important for us to talk about for people because I think that people get very discouraged with a concept like, are you willing to feel good? And
Mm,
it's like, well, yeah, duh, obviously I want to feel good, but I think they feel so far away from, well, I got work and I got kids and I got the house and I got the bills and I think that discourages people from, and you talk about, how about 10% every day? How about 20%? How about
mm.
like how do we get there? And I think that's something that, people really need to hear about. How do we, it's not a 0 to 100 in a day. How do we go from a little at a time?
Yeah, that's such a good point. Well, actually, I was just looking around here to see if I had a copy, but I have a new book, and I don't know where my cleaning ladies put it.
The big leap
Because I've
year.
given, yeah, your big leap here. I've given
Yeah.
about 75 interviews on it over the past
Oh my
couple of
goodness.
months. So you'd think I'd find the book here somewhere, but my office has been cleaned, so I can't find anything. Um, but your big leap year is designed to give you something you can do every day that may
Mm,
be 30 seconds or 2 minutes, but none of them take very long at all. But to me, that's discipline. It's just showing up every day as being committed to your creativity, committed to your genius.
mm.
Getting, just like I'm committed to brushing my teeth every day. I'm committed to flossing every day. I do that because it helps take care of my mouth.
Mhm.
And so to me, if we can get just that committed to bringing forth a little more of our genius every day, in the course of a year, you may have only brushed your teeth 3 or 4 times a day, but it shows up when you go in
Right.
for your annual visit,
Right. Shows up if you don't
right?
too.
Yeah, oh yeah. Well,
Right.
I grew up in the deep South where worst diet imaginable, like candy and soda and all that kind of stuff. So I had a mouthful of teeth that I needed to get fixed as a grown up. But now I'm very meticulous about it, and
Mm,
a reformed person is often very meticulous about it.
mhm. Do you feel like with our creativity that, I think something for myself that has shifted over the last year is not creating for the purpose of an outcome, but creating more for the purpose of allowing that creativity to flow through me. And then, oh, Oprah calls all of a sudden, or things like that start to just kind of happen where instead of creating this outcome that we're attached to, letting that flow and letting that kind of manifest in whatever comes forth.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I was just reflecting back when you mentioned Oprah because I can remember the thing that happened
Mm,
just before she called. Now, this goes back 30 years. Katie and I had written a book called Conscious Loving, and it came out, and we didn't get on all the shows when it first came out because it was right in the middle of the Persian Gulf War, the first one back in 1990. So it wasn't until the paperback came out that, we got on all the shows like Oprah and things like that. But this thing happened just before it. One night, Katie and I had finished working with a group of about 10 couples that we worked with every week for a therapy group. And it was in our living room, actually, of our old house, because it was a large living room. It could hold a pretty big group of people. And so we had finished and we were sitting in front of the fireplace, kind of discussing how things went. And I suddenly had this wave. I said, we've got to get this out to more and more people.
Mm.
This, we were talking about, we were seeing these miracles happen in these groups, where people would learn these simple things like how to talk to another person about a problem without it becoming an argument,
Mm.
or how to share your feelings with another person without them getting threatened by it, or, all these things that sound like simple things, but they're not very simple at all,
Mhm.
because they're, I didn't learn anything about that when I was in high school or college even.
Right.
Yeah. And so anyway, we started thinking about we've really got to get this out to a larger audience. And a few days later, our publicist called and said that she had talked to Oprah's people and had booked us on that show. It was in a few days after this kind of, I really
Wow.
wanted to, yeah. And I don't think there's anything unusual about that, in the sense that I've heard the same story from thousands of other people, like in the relationship realm. I've heard a lot of people, single people, that come through one of our singles um, workshops and say, okay, I realize that I haven't really been available for a
Mm.
close relationship, and I see why. But now I want to make a commitment that I am now available for a close relationship.
Mm.
Boom, I
Boom.
see
Right.
that happen. Yeah. And to me, that's miracle stuff, because what excites me about being a human being is when I discover more and more and more about my natural, universally given potentials.
Mm.
There's all these parts of our brain that they don't know what's in them yet. They don't know what they're there for.
Yeah.
Yeah. And big open spaces that haven't, so, like, haven't got any writing on them yet, haven't got any software.
Right.
And who
Right.
knows where we're going from here.
Mm.
But, to me, the best thing we can do is take a little time each day to commit ourselves to our creativity, and especially focus on the things that we most love to do and make the biggest contribution to the world around us.
Mm. So just doing it a little bit every day with the purpose of just creating and
Yes.
doing something that we love, no matter what, the outcome or the whatever happens.
Yeah. And what, like with the new book, Your Big Leap Year,
Yeah.
getting 366, because there's leap years,
Mhm.
366 days of little bits of wisdom, each of which give you a new way of looking at the world, and often a new little guided meditation to do during the day, or a new thing to think about during the day, a mantra to think about during the day. And so committing yourself to doing that on a regular basis, it's just like a friend of mine, Scott. Um, he was an executive for a hotel chain for 30 years, and basically sat in an office chair for 30 years. And so when he retired, he had some of the baggage that comes from sitting in an office chair for 30 years, like 30 extra pounds.
Hmm.
And but he also hated to work out. So he made a deal with himself that for the first week he would go to the gym and do one chin up. And for
Right.
the second week, he would go to the gym and do two chin ups. But by the end of the year, he's doing 50 chin
Right.
ups a day, and he's lost 30 pounds.
Right.
So it was really beautiful to see how a little bit of positive energy each day can create miraculous, seemingly miraculous changes.
Mm. That's so cool. Um, so one of the things I had written down to kind of ask you about, you talk about in the Genius Zone, which I have here.
Thank you.
Of course, that's the second time I read it this month. I love it. You said Finally, I want you to understand in your mind, body, how the act of accepting and loving your negative thoughts, just as they are, dissolves and disappears them. This open-hearted act, acknowledging your negative thoughts with acceptance rather than censure, releases your attachment to them. Whew, that's a big task. Easier said than done. How do we like really go about practically doing that?
Well, you just do it once first.
Okay. Okay,
That's
I
the
can do
first
that.
key. Yeah. Right in the middle of some chain of negative thoughts, if you can catch yourself and just realize, let me love those as they are,
Mm,
because they come from some painful place in myself. I wouldn't be thinking a chain of negative thoughts otherwise. So let me just open up and love that painful place in myself as much as I can. Or
mhm,
let me love those negative thoughts as much as I can. Or especially if they're coming from somebody else. That's real big time. Major league is when you can think of someone else's negative thoughts about you and fully accept those.
wow.
Just
That's big.
opening up. Yeah, that's very
Hmm.
big. And yet, what could be better in a way? Because, even if the person is just grinding their own axe,
Hmm.
it's good practice in opening up and letting yourself feel whatever sadness or anger or fear or whatever you feel when people say things like that. But here's the thing, at some point, until you learn to love yourself, you're kind of like a dog chasing its own tail around and around, because ultimately there is only one thing that really heals us, and that is love. And to love ourselves deeply for everything that we are and everything that we are not. Because the moment you can do that, you become one instead of a person who has these unlovable things and the person who hasn't learned to love those yet. Just finally opening up and using your own special power of love to love those unlovable bits in yourself. That's major league work right there because, like I say, you only have to do it once. And it's so powerful that then you can do it again and again and again easier. It's just like if you've never seen the moon before and somebody points up at the moon and says, that's the moon. And you say, oh, geez, I never noticed that thing. Well, that's a big moment because you go from a position of division to a position of union where you suddenly realize this moon is in our purview, it's in our field of vision. All these other things are in our field of vision, and I am made of the same stuff in the universe that makes up everything else. And so to feel one and connected to this universe is a very powerful place to take yourself every day. It makes life so much easier than standing in opposition to everything.
Mm. Something I hadn't thought about until right now in our conversation, because your books are just so incredible. Is there, like, in your writing process, I imagine, because you're human, like the rest of us, there are times that, or maybe you can tell me about feeling like, well, is this going to resonate? Well, are people going to, connect with this? Is this the message that I really am trying to share? How do you reconcile with that during the creative process?
That's a great question. I don't think anybody's asked me that. Uh, but
Wow.
yeah, wow. Um, when I'm writing something, long before I start writing anything down on my computer or a notepad or anything like that, it's up in my head and I'm trying to figure out the voice to use to communicate that particular thing.
Mm,
And I might experiment, like the first paragraph of Conscious Loving, I rewrote it something like 120 times. It's only 8 or 10 sentences, but I spent hours and hours and hours crafting that first paragraph because I knew if I got it right, everything else was going to flow from it. And it did, I just kept working on it until I had it the way I wanted it. So once I get that voice right, then to me, it's like talking to a person. I'm writing it down just as if I'm talking to you right now. And so I'm kind of being you and me at the same time. I'm expressing it in the best way I can. And I'm also mindful of how it will be received by different people. Like, for example, there are some people who learn by examples. There are some people who learn with pure digital text. They can read a concept and they have it. Some people need an example. That's not any good or better or anything. It's just you have to, as you're a writer, you have to know that, because when I write something, I want to write something that will engage the auditory learner and will engage the kinesthetic learner, the body learner, and will also the visualizer, yeah, and the emotional learner. And so if you go back and you read several paragraphs of any of my books, you'll see that it always, like every paragraph, will start with a concept, and then I'll use an example or tell a little story or use a visual kind of thing. And I keep varying those as I go along. So they're not all just visual. Some of them are in the body kind of feelings, and some of them are auditory things that your person would access through their ears. But I think good writers have a way of engaging all different sorts of learners. One of the big complaints I always hear about writers is they don't use enough stories and examples. They try to sell concept. Well, to me, the stories and the examples are the real good, juicy stuff. That's where a concept comes alive. So nobody's ever going to criticize my writing because I don't have enough stories and examples. Right. Practically every paragraph has one. And that's one of the best pieces of feedback I get from my readers is often they will say, like, I don't usually read a lot of books because or whatever, but you have a different way of writing. And I take that a great pride in that. So it's a skill, it's a talent, it's a gift, but it's something I work on all the time too.
I think it's so beautiful to hear you talk about, rewriting that paragraph. And I think creative people, when they are attached to the outcome, that's where that negative self-talk might come in, where it's like, why can't you get this right? And for you, I think your approach of, refine, like tweak a little bit more, and the enjoyment that you got out of it is probably why it allowed it to manifest the way that it did.
One of my favorite musicians over the past half century has been Leonard Cohen, who just passed away not too long ago at a ripe old age. There's a song he wrote called Take This Waltz. There's a concert hall in Vienna. Well, that's adapted from a poem called The Little Viennese Waltz by Lorca, the famous Spanish poet Lorca. So he adapted from Lorca's poem this beautiful song, Take This Waltz. I recently found out that he worked on that poem to the song 150 hours.
Wow. Right.
The poem is only, it's probably 20 or 30 lines long. It's not even a page long. And to turn that into a song, 150 hours over a long period of time. I'm sure he didn't stay up for 13 days straight. But imagine that.
Mm.
When's the last time I worked on something for 150 hours straight? Or so let's
Yeah.
ask ourselves, are we not only open to our creativity, but are we putting in the time every day? Are we budgeting the hour or the 10 minutes or the 3 hours that we want to put into our creativity every day?
Mm. That's so cool. I love that. Oh, I could talk about creativity all day.
Hey, I'm going to suggest something too, because I can think
Yes,
of about a
please.
million other aspects of this I want to talk about. Let's get back together a little while down the line.
Okay, fantastic. Is there anything you kind of want to leave us with on this conversation?
We've covered a lot of exciting territory, but the reason I'm enjoying this conversation so much is it's directly on the subject of creativity.
Mm.
And you mentioned something, that your creativity, instead of having it be about an outcome, you engaged with it for the pure sake of creativity. That's incredibly important. And my Leonard Cohen example, you don't work on something 150 hours for an outcome. I mean, he got a great outcome out of it. It produced an outcome, but the love that's involved in 150 hours of refining words. Oh my God. Go listen to the song, folks. Take This Waltz. I can't remember which album it's
Uh-huh.
on, but and then read the poem by Lorca, Little Viennese Waltz, and you'll see that they're not that different, but what he did with it is just mind-boggling.
Wow, I can't wait. Well, I won't keep you from your lunch. Thank you so much for your time. It has been such a joy to read your books and then get to have a conversation with you. It really is life-changing. I recommend them to all of my clients. I work with a lot of creative people and say you really got to do this work. So thank you for your work. And
Well,
yeah,
thank you for discovering your genius zone and getting
yeah,
involved in getting the message out to the world.
absolutely, absolutely. Well, we'll talk soon. So
Blessings to
nice
you.
to meet you. Same to you. Talk soon.